Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight. And I'm going to be giving an update on the Montrose Settlements Restoration Program, which I will refer to as MSRP. So just an overview of the talk. I'll give a little bit of background on MSRP. Then I'll highlight 3 bird restoration projects on the islands. First is the bald eagle reintroduction program, which is our signature, our largest and longest restoration project that we have going for birds. I'll highlight a habitat restoration program on Santa Barbara Island here. And then finally, I'll talk about a seabird restoration project that we have going on the Baja, California Islands in Mexico. And then I'll wrap it up with just a quick, where are we going for MSRP in the future? So some of you may be familiar with the Montrose case and the whole settlement process, but between the 1940s and 1970s, the Montrose Chemical Corporation operated a manufacturing plant in Torrance, California. And between those years, they discharged over 1,800 metric tons of DDT waste into the sanitation pipes, which outflowed off of the Palos Verdes Peninsula here, the White Point. They also dumped an additional 500 metric tons of DDT in the ocean near Catalina Island. So the contamination, both DDTs and PCBs, entered into the marine ecosystem, settled in the sediments off the Palos Verdes Shelf, and eventually made its way through the food web via benthic invertebrates, worms, whatnot, up into the fish, and then farther up through the food chain. And with chemical contamination, what happens is the predators at the top of the food chain tend to bio-magnify the contamination. So those species that are at the highest part of the food chain, like bald eagles and peregrine falcons, have the highest dose of contamination. And also birds like bald eagles, they not only feed on sea lion carcasses, but they also feed on gulls and fish. So there's many pathways for the contamination to reach bald eagles, for example. So as a result of this contamination, scientists were noticing that on the Channel Islands in particular, as well as across the United States, that some populations of birds were experiencing severe eggshell thinning as a result of the DDT contamination. Right here in our own backyard, brown pelicans completely collapsed on the Channel Islands in the late 1960s, and bald eagles also had issues, as well as peregrine falcons, with eggshell thinning. As a result of the injuries that were documented to these natural resources, such as bald eagles and peregrines, pelicans, the federal and state governments brought a lawsuit against Montrose Chemical Corporation, as well as other manufacturing entities in 1990. A 10-year-long litigation resulted in a settlement in 2001, and approximately $30 million was made available for natural resource restoration. Additional monies were part of the settlement as well that were given to the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, to do the site cleanup and remediation of the contaminant zone, which is a Superfund site. So the Montrose Trustee Council is the agency or the organization that oversees the implementation of the restoration program. It's made up of 6 agencies, 3 federal, 3 state, and they created the program in 2002, shortly after the settlement was reached. And we released a restoration plan in 2005, and then a subsequent one in 2012, and that really laid the groundwork for what projects we were going to be implementing with the restoration fund. So today I'm going to focus on the bird restoration projects because I serve as the bird biologist for the program, but there is a whole fish component side to the restoration program. And so I'm just going to really briefly highlight what fish projects have been done using the restoration funds. There was a wetland restoration project in Huntington Beach, Talbot Marsh, in 2008-2009 as part of the Huntington Beach Wetlands Complex that we contributed to. We contributed to the dredging of the Bolsa Chica wetlands as a needed maintenance to keep the channel open there. And both of these projects are really for fish nursery, for increasing fish nursery habitat and improving fish populations. We contributed to monitoring of the marine protected areas around the Channel Islands for several years, as well as doing public education regarding safe fishing practices. So part of our role is to also educate the public about which fish are safe to eat, which are not, what are the best ways to prepare fish and eat them. So this is an ongoing aspect of our program that we partner with EPA with on as well. So that was phase one that lasted for the first 7 years of the project. From 2012 to 2018, the second phase, the focus for fish habitat restoration is mostly first we're restoring subtidal reef habitat by placing out artificial reef modules. And this is going to be located on the Palos Verdes Shelf. And the goal here is to provide some high relief habitat that attracts fish that are cleaner, reef fish that are in the mid to higher level water column that aren't as contaminated as some of the benthic fish that continue to feed in the contaminated mud. So part of the goal here is to provide additional habitat that will attract cleaner fish. Also, we have a project to restore kelp forest habitat off of the Palos Verdes Shelf. There's a problem with urchins creating these urchin barrens because the absence of urchin predators along the coastline, such as sea otters, for example, sheephead, lobsters are also predators of these urchins. In the absence of such predators, you have a proliferation of urchins, and then it displaces the kelp. So we have a project that is removing the urchins, and then you have almost immediate results of kelp forest coming back. Here's just the before and after 1 month difference once you started removing the urchins. And again, we're continuing with public education. So just as an overview of the bird restoration projects, this is not all of them, but this is the main restoration projects that we've done. The Bald Eagle project is our longest, as I mentioned. It started in 2002, and it will go through next year. We've been monitoring the recovery of peregrine falcons on the islands, several initial surveys early on in the 2000s, and then it is now part of the Bald Eagle monitoring project on an annual basis. We are doing a seabird habitat restoration project on Santa Barbara. This is also a long project that started in 2007, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. We are restoring habitat on Scorpion Rock off of Santa Cruz Island. We are also restoring ashy storm petrels, which is this bird right here, on Orizaba Rock by using social traction and providing additional habitat for that species. We removed feral cats from San Nicolas Island in 2009, 2010. And I did a Shore-to-Sea lecture on that project a couple years ago. So if any of you are interested, you could look that one up. And then finally, another project is the Baja California Pacific Island Seabird Restoration Project, which I'll also discuss more. So these are some of our target species, obviously bald eagles, peregrine falcons. This is the Scripsis murrelet, a rare seabird that's found endemic to the California Islands and the northern Baja Islands. Cassin's Auklet is another target species, and the ashy storm petrel. So bald eagle reintroduction, I'm just going to highlight this project. Most of you are probably familiar with it, but you can't talk about the Montrose program without talking about bald eagles. So I'd like to acknowledge first our partners. We have wonderful partners on this project: Institute for Wildlife Studies and Channel Islands National Park, TNC, Catalina Island Conservancy, and the zoo are just some of our partners on the project. So bald eagles historically occupied all the 8 Channel Islands, and they were also found up and down the Southern California mainland coast. The islands were a mainstay for the eagles, and historic estimates had the population about 30 to 35 pairs. Because of human persecution, such as hunting and egg collection, and then finally the impacts from eggshell thinning and DDT, bald eagles disappeared from the Channel Islands by the early 1960s. An effort to restore eagles back to the Channel Islands began in 1980. This was a decade after the banning of DDT and the suspension of the dumping. Biologists and resource agencies thought, well, let's give it a try. Let's try and restore eagles back to Catalina Island with the hope that then they would repopulate the rest of the Channel Islands. So a program was initiated, and 8-week-old chicks were brought from Alaska and British Columbia and Northern California down to Catalina Island. They were released in hack towers. Well, they were brought to a hack tower. They stayed there for about a month until they're 11 to 12 weeks of age, and then they were released. And this program was successful in that right away pairs started to form. Between 1980 and 1986, 33 eagles were released, and the first pairs started forming in 1987. Those pairs nested, but unfortunately the eggs broke in the nest. So biologists were able to go and collect some eggs and look at contaminant levels. And unfortunately, they found that the contaminant levels were still very high at that time. So starting in 1989, a program of removing the eggs from the nest was initiated, which I'll talk about. So when you look at a Catalina egg during this time frame versus a normal healthy bald eagle egg, you can just right away see that it's pocketed, it's thin compared to a normal healthy egg. And what happens is it results in loss of moisture, gas exchange, and then ultimately the eggs crack and fail. So just a comparison of the scale of the problem that we were having down here in Southern California. There are other areas in the United States that had DDT problems, particularly that they were seeing with raptors, such as the Great Lakes and the Columbia River Basin. So when you look at an egg, you analyze the contents of an egg, and if you have between 3 to 5 part per million DDE level, you can expect some level of eggshell thinning. When you're in the range of 15 part per million, you can basically expect complete failure of that egg. So these are some of the levels that we are seeing in the Great Lakes and Columbia River. Compared to Southern California, we had levels over 32 part per million in some of our eggs. So something major was happening here, and ultimately was traced back to the Montrose plant and the dumping of the DDT into the Southern Cal environment. So the program was initiated where the eggs were removed from the nest. They were artificially incubated up actually at the San Francisco Zoo. So the eggs were flown up to the San Francisco Zoo, tried to hatch out there. And the zoo also had a captive breeding program at that time. They had 7 resident bald eagle pairs that were producing chicks. Those chicks were flown down back to Catalina Island and fostered into the nest. And this program was successful. The adults would readily accept the chicks once they were back into the nest. And I don't know if any of you have seen the IMAX footage of Peter Sharp dangling from the helicopter on some of the nests on Catalina. Is pretty impressive. So at about 8 weeks, the biologists will come back to the nest. They'll band the birds. They'll do some measurements, determine the sex of the bird. They'll put these transmitters on the bird. In the early days with the Catalina program, it was just VHF radio, so the biologists could track them on island. Later on, we increased to the GPS units, which gave us really a snapshot into really their dispersal movements. And then, okay, so this program, as we were monitoring and continuing to manipulate the nest, we would, whenever possible, look at DDT levels. And what we were finding is still in the 90s, early 2000s, we were still having levels of DDT or DDE in the eggs that were exceeding this 15 part per million threshold. So some territories in particular consistently showed high levels. Others, as you started to go into the early 2000s, like the Seal Rocks territory and the Chihuahuan Rocks, they were starting to approach levels where you could expect them to hatch out and be fine. But given this overall picture, it was decided to try a different strategy. And that strategy was looking at releasing birds on Santa Cruz Island to determine the feasibility of establishing a self-sustaining population on the northern islands, and then again, hopefully it would expand out to the rest of the Channel Islands. So between 2002 and 2006, 61 eagles were released. And these were largely from Alaska and then the captive breeding program at the zoo. And as I mentioned, it was the same sort of process with the hack towers. Birds were brought down, got acclimated to their surroundings in the hack tower, and then released at about 11 to 12 weeks. But this time, I guess it doesn't show. Oh, maybe it does. The backpack unit on the bird, we had the GPS unit, which really gave us some interesting information on both their survival and their dispersal. So one thing that was surprising to us is that the greatest source of mortality for the birds was drowning. That as the birds attempted to cross, from Santa Cruz to the mainland, that they would end up in the water somehow. Maybe they were trying to catch a fish, or they got tired because winds or whatever, and that they would end up just floating and probably getting exhausted, and that was the biggest source of mortality that we found for the young birds. We also found some really interesting dispersal movements. Here we are, down here at the Channel Islands. We had some birds go all the way up to British Columbia and back, some all the way to Yellowstone and back. So the GPS units were really interesting. It was definitely confirmed that birds will go to all the Channel Islands. So even though they were released on Santa Cruz, they were visiting and exploring the other islands. So that was one question we had. And then obviously they made much greater movements as well. So in 2006, we had the first real milestone of the restoration project. We had 2 nesting pairs of bald eagles, and they were both successful. This is the first chick to hatch unaided in over 50 years. And that chick is, as some of you may know, A49, and also known as Princess Cruz. And this bird is now on Santa Cruz Island. She, this year, was not able to nest because she was defending her territory from a golden eagle that happened to be there. But last several years, she's nested and has been successful. So we're starting to see second and third generation now eagles that have naturally hatched and bred on the islands. So a lot going on this graph, but I just wanted to give you the overall picture of the bald eagle program. It's been over 30 years out on the islands. And then so just to recap, in the 80s was the Catalina program, the releasing the 33 birds. Some additional releases and fostering in the 1990s. And then we had our second big pulse of releases on Santa Cruz Island from 2002 to 2006. Here in 2006 was our first natural hatch. So this was the real milestone. After that point, because we were successful on Santa Cruz, some of the nests on Catalina Island were not manipulated. So IWS looked at Santa Cruz and like, oh, well, there's some positive news here. Why don't we let those couple nests that were doing better, that had pretty low contaminant levels in their eggs, let's let them go natural and see how they'll do. And they were successful. There were several pairs in 2008 on Catalina Island that were successful. actually in 2007 and 8. And so the decision was made in 2009 to completely stop the manipulation of the birds and just let everything go natural and see how they are. So since 2009, it's all been natural, no fostering. This is all representative of natural hatchings on the island. And in 2016 or 15, last year, we passed the 100th chick to naturally hatch on the island. So it's been just an amazing program to see and to watch these birds expand and do well. And here's just a snapshot of the increase in nesting islands. So for 20 years or so, it was Catalina Island. Then we had Santa Cruz. Santa Rosa then came online, I think in 2008 maybe. And then today, we now have nesting on 5 of the 8 Channel Islands with the recent addition of San Clemente Island 2 years ago. And we do expect that the eagles will continue to expand, and each island that doesn't have one currently is hoping for the next eagle to show up. And they've been seen on San Nicolas Island. Santa Barbara is still pretty small, but we do expect there could be one, and San Miguel Island, I think, is only a matter of time before we have a nesting pair there. So just in overall, when you look at the population as a whole, comparing it to the bald eagle recovery plan, like how are we doing compared to the goals that have been set forth in that plan? And we're getting pretty close. The overall number of fledglings per attempt is getting close to the goal of 1 fledgling per nest. So we're at 0.94. This is as of last year. And then overall nesting success is at 63%, and the goal for the recovery plan is 65%. So for all intents and purposes, we're almost there at the recovery thresholds. And so just a quick recap of this year. We had 17 known pairs and 16 fledglings. And on the Northern Channel Islands, we had 9 breeding pairs. The number in each island is the number of fledglings that were successful. So on Santa Rosa, we had 3. On Santa Cruz, we had 5 fledglings. And then down here on Catalina, we had 6. And San Clemente, we had 2. So we think there's an overall population of about 60 bald eagles on all 8 islands right now. And one of the greatest things about this program has been the outreach and the involvement with citizen science and the public. And we had several webcams both on Santa Cruz Island and on Catalina. And we partnered, or the park partnered this year with explore.org for the webcam on Santa Cruz Island at the Sauce's Nest. And it's just been a really great interaction between school groups. We have a lot of groups that follow the nest throughout the season. And this is a classroom in Oxnard that called themselves the Lemonwood Eaglets. This is several years ago, and they tracked the nest every day. Their students would record and have their observation sheets. And it's been a really great way to bring the islands to the classroom and also just into everybody's homes. And we have many great dedicated viewers that will actually alert us if something's happening and if we don't know about it. So there's been many times where we'll get the email or the call or something's happening, and then that will trigger a response. So it's been really a great program and interaction through the webcams. So I have only one slide on peregrines, I think, but I just wanted to give you a quick update of where we are for 2016 for peregrine falcons. This was another species that was extirpated from the islands. The Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group started releasing birds out on the Channel Islands in the 1980s. Sort of similar program. Their recovery has been faster than bald eagles. They eat mostly terrestrial birds, so they weren't having as many sources of contamination as the bald eagles. So I think that played into their recovery a little bit faster. But here we are today. We have about 50 occupied territories across the islands. and the majority of them are on the northern islands, just mostly a reflection of the larger prey base for the birds. They eat shorebirds, seabirds, just higher diversity and density of birds on the northern islands. Okay, so switching gears off of raptors to seabirds, here's our little Santa Barbara Island, 1 square mile. It's part of Channel Islands National Park. It's about 40 miles off the coast. And we are doing a seabird habitat restoration program. Like many of the Channel Islands, Santa Barbara has been drastically altered. Invasive animals and ranching, farming really altered the landscape out there and the vegetation communities. And this island in particular has been really slow to recover. So our goal was to come in and try and kickstart some of these areas, get some additional non-native weeds removed and plant some natives out there and try and encourage nesting of seabirds. This is one of the most important seabird islands in the park, in part because there's no foxes present. This island and Anacapa Island don't have foxes, so that's an important feature for ground nesting birds that could get impacted by foxes. So one of our target species is the Scripsis murrelet. As I mentioned, the endemic species found nowhere else besides the California current, only nesting here on the Channel Islands and on some of the islands in northern Baja, California. Murrelets on Santa Barbara Island like to nest both in the rocky crevices, like this one over here, and also under vegetation. It's a little bit different than Anacapa Island, where they're mostly in the sea caves and in rocky crevices. On Santa Barbara, they really like the vegetation, and they tend to do a little bit better under native vegetation, probably protection from predators. So what we've been doing since 2007, we have a total of 6 different restoration plots. This is mostly focused around Landing Cove area, just for access and ease logistics. But we also have one over here at Arch Point and Elephant Seal Cove. And then the campground is right over here. So we're working there as well. So working on Santa Barbara Island has been an extremely difficult and challenging project. There's no fresh source of water, no perennial source of water. So all the water that we use for our project, we have to bring in. We have to barge it over and then get it off the boat and onto the island and into storage tanks. So this is Santa Barbara Dock here. In the beginning, we were mostly doing using these water totes. Can hold about 4,000 gallons, and then we'd pump it up the hill to some holding tanks. Now we have a system where we bring in a larger vessel and pump off about 12,000 gallons. But it's intensive, and there's no motorized equipment on the islands. There's augers, but there's no vehicles or anything like that. So to transport things around, we either do it on our back or preferably by helicopter. So when we're out planting each fall, we have helicopters come and help us move the equipment and the plants around. We built a nursery out there because we wanted to produce plants. So originally we started a little shade house with a shade house, but we needed something bigger. And so we with the help of a lot of volunteers. Volunteers have been so key on this project. We've had tons of great volunteers. We built this nursery out there. It produces about 7,000 plants a year, and we try and recycle the water as much as possible. This nursery is designed so any water that comes down goes into a holding tank that we can reuse. Since the project started, we've grown over 30,000 plants and now planted. All the seed is collected from on island, and the only thing we bring out is soil, sterilized soil, but we grow it all from seed on island. So here's just a couple before and after shots. This is Landing Cove, for any of you who have hiked up that fun hill. It's called the Stairmaster of Santa Barbara Island. Here's just a early on picture, and then you can see now the native Coreopsis and other native species starting to fill in. And then here is this is the ranger housing here. And there's a lot of ice plant on the island and other non-natives. So part of what we do is remove a lot of ice plant. And then here's the same plot. This is the nature trail plot. And a couple years ago, we started to put everything on drip irrigation because we were finding that we had little, well, first we started with backpack water sprayers, which wasn't efficient at all. And then we went to hoses, and now we're on drip irrigation, which it's hard to set up initially in the beginning, just labor intensive, but then it's so much more effective, and our survival has been greatly increased with the use of drip irrigation, and now we'll never go back. So this is really the way to do it. Get it on drip for a couple years, and then the plants get established, and then you can leave it alone. Here is one of our sites at Beacon Hill, and you can tell some of the plants that we've actually planted, but then the ice plant. This is all just recruiting ice plants. The seed bank is extensive out there, so it just takes a lot of maintenance of these sites. And we have volunteer groups that will come out and help us weed, and then our staff are out there for many, many hours. But it is possible. This is the same site. We clear it, and we're also using, where possible, we use some herbicide out there to, if we have large areas of ice plant that we can spray, we will, and that's been very effective as well. So one issue that we've encountered, we started a little colony for Cassin's auklets using social traction, and that is where you use sounds, vocalizations, you project sound out from speakers, and you try and attract the bird. And in this case, Cassin's auklets used to nest all over Santa Barbara Island. The historical accounts were that the island was riddled with burrows, but now you find very few Cassins. So we wanted to try and attract them to our restoration sites, and we in several other places too, we have these artificial burrows. So it's basically like a flower pot and some corrugated metal that they can enter in and find a secure nesting spot. Unfortunately, this was our techniques. Barn owls clued into them. So when they were attracted to the sounds as well, and we attracted a little colony of Cassin's auklets into this one site here at Landing Cove, but the barn owls were an issue. So we've somewhat suspended that program right now until we figure out a better way, because obviously we don't want to attract birds in and then just have the barn owls kind of waiting for them. And this, you can see a barn owl has one of the auklets that were attracted in. We also have had the issue with barn owls predating on Scripsis murrelet, and Santa Barbara Island is one of the key murrelet colonies in the world. And in 2010, we had over 30 barn owl pairs, or 30 barn owls total on island. This is 1 square mile. That's some of the highest density of barn owls that anyone's ever recorded. So that year, and that population really cycles with the mouse population on the island. So the mice were high, the owls were responding, and then when the mice population crashes, the owls have to switch. So, and what do they switch to? They switch to seabirds. So this particular year, we recorded 79 Scripsis murrelet carcasses from one barn owl nesting site. So it's a challenge, but barn owls are a native predator out there, as are deer mice. Deer mice impact the eggs. So it's just something that you have to be aware of, and it can influence the success of your restoration efforts. Some things are out of your control. But we are having some nice success within our restoration plots. Here's Landing Cove and all the blooming Coreopsis. And then last year, one of our techs, Gabby, was very excited. She found the first nesting murrelet in our restoration plot here at Landing Cove. And this particular nest was right here. And you can see this is the dock and Landing Cove. So we have Murrelets outside. And this is all of our restoration areas. So it's just a matter of time before we expect Murrelets to start nesting in our site and the vegetation to be mature enough and provide enough protection. So it did happen last year, and this is the chick from one of the nests. And the really cool thing about these birds is when they're about 2 to 3 days old, they leave the nest and they kind of make their way down. They bounce down the cliff and the hillsides down to the water to their parents. So it's pretty amazing to actually find a chick at this age. And so in last year we had 5 successful nesting pairs in our plots. So that was really exciting. And it took time. We had started this project in 2007, and we didn't get our first nesting pair until 2008. So, if you have just a really short window of time to do restoration, you may not see the results in that time. So I think that's one lesson learned for sure. These projects take time. And then here's one of our other new nesting sites. This is the Beacon Hill plot where I showed you all that ice plant. We had a sueda bush that really grew up and it started nesting under there. So we have high hopes that the birds will continue to expand in these areas. So some of our conclusions from this project, we've seen increase in biodiversity for vegetation communities. We have better soil structure and stabilization. The nesting conditions are beginning to be mature enough, or the vegetation conditions for nesting birds, and they provide excellent cover for predators. All the techniques that we're testing out on Santa Barbara Island has been useful not only for other places in the Channel Islands, but also elsewhere down in Baja and elsewhere. Anywhere you're working on remote islands, we've learned a lot from this project and are applying it to other places. We hope to continue to monitor out there to evaluate the recovery and the success of the birds. And the big one, which I mentioned earlier, is it takes time, patience, and a lot of resources and investment. So what happened too this past season is this is not how you want the dock at Santa Barbara Island to look. So this happened in El Nino. We got all the nice swells, but we got none of the rain. So we didn't get any rain hardly at all on Santa Barbara Island, but we got some monster swells that basically dismantled the dock. So this is what it looks like today. Some of these might actually be gone now. And there's going to be a longer term solution out here at this dock. This is not the first time it's been damaged, but this is the worst that it's been damaged. And so the island is closed right now. So we really can't work on the island without the use of the dock. It's just too logistically challenging. Our crew right now are swapping out via helicopters, and it's too expensive and it's not feasible. So what we're shifting our project right now, our focus for the next couple years, and we're going to be working on East Santa Capa Island and doing similar work as we were doing on Santa Barbara Island, looking at seabird habitat restoration, working with Channel Islands Restoration, who's already been out there. This is Kelly Green. She's the nursery manager, and we're partnering with them already, and we've started growing plants, and we're gonna focus in on this lighthouse slope in the first year. So it's a little bit of a challenge. We'll continue to stay on Santa Barbara Island next year, but we're not gonna grow new plants. We're just gonna maintain what we have and continue to monitor. But we're fortunate that this Anacapa project, it needs some input and some energy into it. So we're excited to start contributing to this project. Okay, so finally, the last project I'm gonna highlight is the Baja, California project. And similar to the Channel Islands, the Baja Islands are an extension They have high levels of biodiversity, and they support a diverse group of seabirds. There's 21 breeding species of seabirds, even more than we have here in the Channel Islands, of which 6 of them are endemic. And like up here, the seabirds on those islands were impacted by invasive species, DDT, and oil pollution. And Mexico, the government of Mexico, in collaboration with NGOs down there, have done just a tremendous job in removing non-native invasive species from their islands. All of the California Pacific Islands are free of non-native invasive mammals, except one, which Guadalupe Island, which they're actively trying to plan and raise money to do a feral cat eradication project out there. But they have systematically gone through and cleaned up the remaining Baja California islands. So now they're really poised to do the next step, which is to start bringing back the seabirds that are no longer there, and trying to restore the habitat and do more protection of the islands. So Grupo de Conservación de Islas is the main NGO down there that has been working since 2008 on the islands. And then our project started in 2013, and we are working on 9 groups of islands and 21 different species. And this is a truly binational partnership. Conservación de Islas is the Mexico NGO that's leading it, but they're working closely with Audubon and Cornell Lab of Ornithology, because there's a large component of social traction. And Steve Kress from Audubon, he's kind of the guru of social traction. He started the Puffin Project in Maine, and he has been providing a lot of expertise on this project. And we also have partners with the Friends, the Mexican Fund for Nature, and NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And this is part of a larger effort between Mexico, Canada, and the US to collaborate and conserve islands across the 3 countries. So this trilateral island initiative, this project really folds nicely into that effort to look across North America and island conservation across. So Montrose and the Luckenbach Trustee Council, which is another trustee council in California, are the major funders for this project. So here are the islands. Here, Coronado Island, right off of the coast of San Diego, and Todos Santos, and then San Martin, San Jeronimo, Natividad, San Roque, and Asunción. These are the 7 islands that we are focused on for this project. And the activities include monitoring, social traction. This is a picture here of a cormorant colony. These are decoys. These are basically wooden cormorants. And then you have, it last year attracted an actual nesting bird, a real live bird. So the social traction is a big component. These are burrows, artificial burrows for cats and Auklets here. And there's also a big educational outreach component where GESE, which is the Grupo de Ecología y Conservación de Islas, they're out in the island communities working with the school kids and the groups there to educate them about the islands and the importance of protecting their islands and their seabirds. So there's a lot of education outreach, as well as biosecurity, which is the efforts to try and prevent the introduction of rats and cats and everything else back onto these islands. Now that the islands are clean, the real effort and now has to go into protecting them and keeping them clean. So there's social traction for surface nesters, for double-crested and Brent's cormorants. This is on, I think this is on Coronados Island. So 15 different colonies of over 500 decoys across the islands and 12 sound systems. And then in 2015, we actually had on Todos Santos 8 nests within the artificial colony, which fledged 4 chicks. So that was pretty exciting. Even if birds come in the first couple of years, even if they come and just check out the decoys, that's considered a success, because you want them to start visiting the locations. So we were pretty excited to get actual nesting in the first couple of years. And then here are the burrows for some of the burrow nesting seabirds, like the Cassin's auklets and ashy storm petrels. And then here is the little sound system. It's powered by a solar panel. And then it just continually at night will project out the sounds, and the birds come and check it out, and hopefully they come in and start nesting in there. It projects their calls. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, they have many recordings, like very high quality recordings of bird calls. So what's most effective in bringing in birds is a territorial call. So birds have different sounds, and there's territorial calls, and then there's more just like contact calls, like clucking. But we found that the ones that have the most success in bringing in birds are territorial calls. So in this case, for Cassin's auklets, we're playing Cassin auklet calls to try and to bring in that particular seabird. And what's kind of cool is the Cassin's auklets nest earlier on in the season, and the ashy storm petrels just start nesting now. So the Cassins are essentially done. Now it'll be switched to ashy storm petrel calls, and now the focus will be on trying to bring in ashy storm petrels. Like next, okay, who's going to come and occupy these burrows now? The biologists down there do monitoring. This is a burrow scope. Many of the natural burrows, you can't see in them because the birds are really dug down in there. So this is a little camera. Has a little camera on the end, and then they can look at a screen and see if it's occupied or not. So sorry, this is a little hard to read probably, but just by virtue of having the presence of all these biologists on the islands and increasing the information and the effort, we've already had a bunch of milestones in the project in the first 3 years of the project. So, for example, on Coronado Sur, the black storm petrel used to be extirpated, and now it's breeding. On Cassin's auklet, on Todos Santos Island, I think it was last year was the first recorded nesting in over 100 years for that species. Scripps' Murrelet, we've documented an increasing breeding population. There's now 90 nests on Todos Santos Island. And even things like now we know ashy storm petrels are breeding there. It's just really increasing our knowledge of the status of the seabirds on these islands. And just kind of going down the different islands, we have examples of first breeding records for Guadalupe Murrelet, which is a very restricted Murrelet, essentially to only a couple islands, Guadalupe being the main colony. But that one is threatened by the presence of the feral cats on the island. So to find them breeding on another island here on San Jeronimo is just great news for that species. So we also are encouraging exchanges between the biologists here on the Channel Islands and the Mexican biologists. So we hosted several biologists from Mexico to Santa Barbara Island last year, and a couple of our crew went down there this year. And we monitor the same species, so we're trying to have coordination in terms of timing and comparable data. And then also they got to participate in the habitat restoration project and see the nursery and really learn from what we're doing up here. So just in conclusion for this project, this is a comprehensive 5-year program. And it includes habitat restoration, the social attraction, education, outreach, and management. And just by having the biologists on the island interacting with the island community, it's going to promote long-term conservation for those islands. This project has also trained a bunch of Mexican biologists down there. So we're developing specialized expertise in country with commitments to those islands and long-term investment in those islands. It's a great example of international collaboration, and so far we've seen some pretty neat results. So the future for MSRP, unfortunately, we're doing a good job spending our money. So we are kind of we're getting to the last couple years of our program. Bald eagles and peregrine falcons. Next year is our last year of funding, which is really tough. We've been funding it for 16 years. So that's going to be a bit of a transition. We have funds for the Anacapa project / Santa Barbara project through 2020, but it's a decreasing level of funding. The Baja project will last one more year. Next year is the 5th year. The fish projects will continue on a little bit longer, probably through 2019. Just the permitting takes a long time for the artificial reef project, so that's still in the works. And we're actively seeking partners, writing grants, trying to keep these projects going, finding new partners that are interested, and trying to build, for example, for Santa Barbara Island, really that whole island could be restored, and it is feasible. It's a 1 square island. We need some donors with some vision that are interested in taking on a project like that. There's a lot of work that's gone into a lot of investment, and we want to make sure that it doesn't just kind of fade away now that the Montrose funds are winding down. And then working with the park on transition. So there'll be some new things that the park hopefully will have staffing to keep up with, like the bald eagle monitoring, and kind of working on we've basically been, the Montrose has basically been funding most of the seabird program for the park. So we're going to try and bring in new partners and try and keep some of that seabird work ongoing. So this is our website, montroserestoration.noaa.gov. We have all of our reports and publications online. We've created several neat videos for the projects. So I encourage you, if anyone wants to get more information about the projects, check out our website. And our partners are so critical to the success of the program. We've really done a lot in the 15 years, but it's only possible because of all these excellent partners that we've had. So this is all I could fit on the slide, but there are more. And then finally, last slide here, I wanted to put in a quick plug for the California Island Symposium, which is coming up October 3rd through 7th. It's right here in Ventura at the Ventura Marriott. Early registration closes soon, so if any of you are interested in going, it's a great meeting. We talk about all sorts of topics within the islands, from archaeology, biology, cultural resources. So it's really interdisciplinary symposium, and you have a lot of educators, scientists, geologists, kind of all there mixing together. And we're having a rediscovery workshop on the first day. Daily plenary speakers, and lots of fun social events and field trips. So if anyone's interested, check out our website, californiaislands.net. So with that, I will take any questions you have.
So the Baja California Islands, are they a reserve, or is there population on the islands?
The Baja Islands, the southern islands are part of a biosphere reserve, and actually the northern islands, the ones that still are not protected under biosphere status, hopefully will this year. There's been efforts over the last about 5 years to make those part of a biosphere reserve, so they have the full protection. So hopefully this year we will see those last remaining islands protected, but they're all under some level of protection of the federal government. So the human population, some of them don't have human population. Some of them have small fishing camps that live there. Some are seasonal, some are permanent. So it kind of just depends on the particular island.
What's the status of that golden eagle on Santa Cruz Island?
So it's still there, and it was just picked up there's a webcam on that nest, on the Fraser Point nest. And so it was just found or just recorded the other day. So it's still present in the territory. It's still kind of having territorial disputes with A49. And right now, the plan is to have the IWS biologists go out to the territory and just do some more scoping and figure out really what that bird's doing and figure out if there's to help figure out a game plan. If we're going to try and remove it, or it's hard to remove a solitary bird. It's easier if they're nesting because they're concentrated in a spot. But I think we just need to evaluate, get a little more information about what's happening there, and come up with a plan of how to manage that bird.
What's the involvement with the U.S. Navy on San Clemente and San Nicolas? Exactly how are they involved in the seabird restoration
Yeah,
project?
well, they are owners of those islands. Those are military islands. For the cat projects, they were just right hand in hand with us partnering on that project. They were very supportive of the project, and there was a lot of logistics, and you had to really work with the Navy, obviously, to not interfere with their operations with the project, because we had about a crew of 10 staff on island at the peak of the cat project, and we had traps set out, so they were all over the island. So we had to make sure that we were coordinating well with the Navy, and so it was a little bit of logistics, but they were very supportive of the project. And then on San Clemente Island with the bald eagle program out there, they are supportive as well, and they allowed a webcam to be actually, well, it's a camera on the site. I don't think it's hooked up to the internet yet, but we have a camera at the bald eagle nest because it's hard to get to. So now at least IWS can on islands look at what's happening with that nest, and so they've been supportive. The Navy has quite a few conservation programs out there, and in the case of San Nicolas Island, there's not a lot of heavy duty impact on the ground. It's mostly radar, and they launch missiles from the island. So it's actually a really great place for wildlife because it's not a lot of heavy impact that you might expect. So the Navy's been a great partner in the project.
I was wondering about Anacapa Island with the crystalline ice plant. What's next with that?
So, well, there's a concerted effort to try and remove the crystalline ice plant, and a lot of progress was made. It just requires ongoing maintenance, and really what you need is once you remove the plant, you really should put another native plant in its place, so it helps stabilize the soil. Otherwise, you kind of open up the soil, and you might get other invasive species in its place that are no better. So really, I think the focus now will be in areas where we try and remove the invasives first, and then put the natives down. And I think just it's a matter of scaling up that project and trying to bring in more partners, because there's a ton of potential on East Anacapa. A lot of work was done, and to try and keep the momentum going and bring it up to that next level where you have plants going in on the ground.
It seems like
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So it needs more attention. Unfortunately, the park had its pot of money for the initial part of the project, and now they don't. So I think it's just a matter of getting more resources to go to that project.
To follow up on that, I thank you for that. I was a work leader with Channel Islands Restoration out on Anacapa for 5-6 years, something like that, and was really frustrated to see that dynamic at work. We would clear so much ground, and then it was just waiting for the crystalline
something else to come in.
So I'm really relieved to hear that there's the plan is now to replace. I always thought that was the key. We needed to replace it with something
Yeah,
that was wanted and would be tended
right.
and occupy that space before something else could move into it.
Right, and
So,
key, I
thank
mean,
you.
key to these projects, the habitat restoration is water
Yes,
and
consistent. water.
consistent water. And
Yes.
that's where the drip irrigation is really nice because it's consistent.
Yeah, and deep.
Yeah,
Not
and
on
right
the
at
ship,
the
yeah.
base of plants. So you're much more successful with that approach. And I
Yeah.
think, I think any efforts that we're involved with, that will be our approach to remove any invasives, put the natives down, and irrigate, and do that for
Thank you.
a couple
Thank
years.
you. Thank you. Major step forward.
Yeah.
You have time for one more question?
This is a watering question. After you finish with the drip irrigation,
Mhm.
those newly planted native plants, how do they get water then? This is
Well,
a drought where
yeah, hopefully you get a little bit of rain, but we've been into sustained drought, as everybody knows. And some of our sites where we've taken off drip after 2 to 3 years, they're hanging in. So they get enough, and hopefully you get fog and other factors that will maintain some level of soil moisture. But yeah, you pray for rain in the winter months. But the nice thing about natives is once you get them established, they will do well. So, the hope is to get them established and then you leave them alone. And we've actually seen on Santa Barbara Island in the plots, we've seen a lot of recruitment now. So I think it's getting them going and on the right track, and then they can maintain over time.
Thank you.
One final.
I'll be here after too if anyone wants to ask more.
Thinking back to my time on Anacapa,
Uh-huh.
a lot of what we planted out there was very low ground cover type things. And
Mhm.
I kept pulling for the malva because
Mhm.
it gave us an elevated habitat.
Yeah.
It's the only place I ever saw terrestrial birds was in the little bit of malva out
Mhm.
there. So is that part of the
Yeah,
plan?
it is. And actually, I don't know if you've been out there lately, but there's a nice patch of malva on that lighthouse slope that's just doing really well. But yeah, malva is in the seed palette, and really for the birds too. I mean, ice plant is not great for the birds, but it can provide a little bit of shade. If the chick's young enough, like a gull, and with the removal, if you don't have anything in its place, the birds are very exposed out there, and so they sustain a lot of heat stress and then predation issues. So. Yeah, we'll definitely look for some structure out there, getting structure. And the malva you should go check it out. It's pretty impressive. It's just like got its own little spot that it's doing very well.
Will there be funding to send volunteers out again? Because
Yes.
Yeah, you can put me on.
Yeah,
that list.
so you can either contact us through Montrose restoration site or Channel Islands Restoration. They're going to be bringing out volunteers. So yeah, fall, we're planning on about 3,500 plants going in the ground this fall. So, and then next year, bumping that up, maybe hopefully to 5,000 or so.
Thanks again, everyone, for your interest in the Channel Islands. Thank you to Annie for sharing your research. And we hope to see you again at our next Short of Sea lecture, and have a safe drive home.
Okay, thank you.